Hi, welcome to CoinDesk Live. Welcome back to CoinDesk Live. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor at CoinDesk. We're here at CoinDesk Studios live in New York. So today, Facebook is going to Washington, where the first of two hearings with the U.S. Congress just concluded moments ago with comments from Libra CEO David Marcus. But we're bringing you interviews here in the studio with crypto experts to break down what happened, what you can expect as this narrative unfolds. My next guest to my right, Mr. Jeff Bandman, the CEO of Block Agent, an SEC-registered transfer agent, and a former fintech advisor at the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
And we were talking a little bit backstage. Preparation for hearings. Obviously, you were with the CFTC during your tenure there. Some notable engagements with lawmakers as you did fact-finding about the cryptocurrency industry. What's that like?
It's a really interesting process, and yeah, as an advisor to Chairman Timothy Massad, the CFTC first testified in front of Congress in 2014 that we thought virtual currencies like Bitcoin were a commodity under the Commodity Exchange Act.
This wasn't the 2013 Senate hearings. This was a separate.
This was yeah, and the focus was not on virtual currencies, but you know it was interesting. We were really just after I had started working at the CFTC. All of a sudden on my calendar, I get these invitations. And so I go to the head of our Hill liaison and I say, Corey, what are these death squads that have just appeared on my calendar? He's like, Jeff, it's not a death squad, it's a murder board. And a murder board is the term for when you prepare the boss to go in front of Congress and prepare them for questions. And so the whole staff gets together and throws really hard questions at him.
You just pick like the meanest things, or what is that process like?
You pick the meanest things. You try to twist things. You put assumptions into the question, and you put it in a way so it's impossible to answer. You're really trying to prepare them so that when they actually get to the Hill, to the extent that the senators or Congress people are courteous, it's nicer than the way their staff treated them.
So you think David Marcus in this hearing, he had to have gone through a process like this?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, given the amount of resources and skill and expertise and advisors, yeah, absolutely. The written testimony, would have gone through a lot of preparation. But yeah, he absolutely, they would have been battle tested with all of their advisors and lobbyists for what might come today.
What about the senators? So we saw a lot, I think there was at least 6, 7, maybe 8 senators that asked questions, about Facebook's cryptocurrency project. What's going on in their minds? What's the interaction like? What don't we see maybe on the live stream?
Yeah, well, so I think the senators and I think a lot of officials are very concerned about about Libra and Calibra, and we'll come back to that. But what's interesting is when you're.
I noticed they rhymed like that.
It's maybe Calibra is the proper pronunciation. But so what's happening is actually, and I don't know whether that was the case in today's hearing because it's so high profile. But often what happens is that the senators or representatives aren't necessarily in the room for the entire hearing, and so they have a lot of other business to attend to. But when it's their turn to ask, have prepared. And since they haven't been sitting in the room, they may not be aware that question was already asked, or a variant of that question may have actually already been asked by somebody else. But then, as you're preparing, for the hearing, the right answer isn't, gee, Senator, if you'd been in the room 30 minutes ago, you would have heard that other senator ask the question. It's, thank you for the question, Senator. That's an excellent question. Here's how I think about it. And, so that's probably what's going on behind the scenes.
Really interesting. So maybe let's talk a little bit about the environment around Facebook's cryptocurrency project, especially as it relates to DC. Maybe you could just describe what's the temperature. Obviously, you're connected with folks who are still in DC, I imagine. What is the temperature going into this hearing? It seems like there's almost more emphasis on Facebook than there is on cryptocurrency. What's your take?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and. I think that cryptocurrencies themselves and kind of fintech innovation, I think are something that both legislators, the executive branch, regulators have been looking at, I think with a lot of balance and an open mind. There's been efforts to have these innovation hubs like LabCFTC, which I set up, which a number of other authorities have. In the case of what Facebook is doing, first of all, there's the backdrop of all the mistrust and problems, Cambridge Analytica, the use or misuse of subscribers' data, the lack of disclosure. So there's an enormous amount of mistrust, and I find that really interesting. And I've been kind of teaching courses in blockchain and global affairs, and one of the things I've reviewed with the students is that in 2008, in 2009, when the white paper came out and the first Bitcoin was mined, it was about mistrust of central banks, mistrust of large financial institutions, mistrust of governments, because those were the people who were perceived as having caused and then not really suffered after the financial crisis. The thing you didn't really hear about in 2008, 2009 was big tech. But now, in 2019, if you ask, who are people suspicious of, where's their mistrust, it's actually the big tech companies that are very much on the firing line, I think in the eyes of the public as well as in the eyes of the legislators.
Well, one of my notable notes, I think, from the hearings was just that it seemed like most of the senators who were hearing some of this the first time sort of positive about the idea that we could do financial services in a way that maybe wasn't a Wall Street big bank kind of model, and they seemed almost interested in that. What's your take?
Yeah, I think that globally, and this is really not limited to the U.S., but reading a lot of the work and that's published by different domestic as well as international authorities, the Financial Stability Board, IOSCO, kind of G20 communiques. Really internationally there is a mixed view of this. That there is definitely a belief that some of these new financial technologies or digital currencies can promote financial inclusion, and that is something that that Facebook has tried to put very front and center. That financial inclusion is something that its currency could help promote. So I think that whether it's the Hill here or regulators around the world, there definitely is an awareness of the benefits of financial inclusion, but they also are looking at some of the risks and detriments that Libra could introduce.
Interesting. Obviously, during your time at the CFTC, I imagine you would have did you think through models like this? Did you get to a point where you asked yourself, well, what if a tech giant launches a cryptocurrency?
Well, so the interesting thing is that Facebook, this seems to be a big new idea here, but actually, in my opinion, Facebook is years behind other tech giants in other parts of the world. And a couple of years ago,
with you mean in respect to cryptocurrency?
Well, with respect to using social media as a platform for kind of payments and other financial products. So, a couple of years ago, in connection with a trip to Hong Kong to meet with international regulators, we saw some of the amazing fintech development that was happening in Hong Kong and China and that part of the world. And so the platforms like WeChat and Alipay, for years now, have been using them for payments, financial products. You can buy insurance, you can buy a mutual fund or an ETF, all on your phone, all on these social media things. So Facebook is way behind. So I didn't have to imagine that as a regulator, because 2.5 years ago, that was already happening. It was just being done by other tech giants in another part of the world.
So if you're someone at the CFTC now, obviously you're not in the private sector now, what are you watching for at a hearing like this? Do you tune in to something like this? Is it on your radar?
So I would say, maybe first the CFTC, but then regulators more broadly. I think that there's enormous interest. I think that a lot of the people at these agencies are just so busy and so constrained in terms of time and resource that maybe a few people whose job it is to sort of understand what's going on the Hill may focus on it. It may not be that people more generally will just be able to kind of drop things and watch it. But I think that kind of more broadly speaking, there's interest in this kind of thing. The other thing I'd say it's the types of regulators who are really, I think, most concerned with what's going on right now with Libra and Calibra. first of all, are regulators who are focusing on financial stability. And in this country, we have the Financial Stability Oversight Council, the FSOC, which is the heads of all the financial regulators. There's the Financial Stability Board. It's in the charter of a lot of the agencies. But for the last couple of years, different groups have looked at crypto assets and have generally concluded that they are not a threat to financial stability because they're small. But now, all of a sudden, you have a platform with 2.5 billion daily active users. So anything it does will necessarily be large. And that doesn't mean it's automatically a threat to financial stability, but because it's so big, all of a sudden you're thinking, wow, this is on such a scale that if this thing gets off the ground and launches, there could be financial stability implications day one. And that's why you have the governor, the chairman of the Federal Reserve and the chair of the Bank of England and a governor of the European Central Bank all actively focusing on this. It's because this does implicate financial stability.
So one of the things I thought was interesting with the CFTC, we saw that there was an announcement or there was an official communique about Bitcoin and how it fell under the CFTC's jurisdiction and your regulatory authority. Can we expect to see something similar with Facebook, or is that sort of implicit in its launch that will occur?
I think that, Pete, what you've said, that's actually one of the most important questions about Libra is, what is it?
Right.
Is it a security? Is it a commodity pool? Is it a payment token? Is it a utility token? Is it a security?
Not that we have any definitions for any of those things. Yeah.
Well, and it's not just domestically but internationally. And so this is a particularly important topic because it's not as if Facebook can just select the category that it self-identifies with, that it can sort of just select its identity and the regulators will accept it. The regulators will look behind the scenes and at the form, not just at the form, but the substance and the function, and they will decide what it is.
Right.
And so, for example, Facebook has said, well, we're going to organize, we're going to put the Libra Association in Switzerland, we're going to be regulated by FINMA. Now, FINMA is the market regulator, and they're of Switzerland. They're a very respected regulator. They've been very forward-looking and engaged with crypto assets because a lot of the initial, earliest work has involved, happened in Switzerland and Crypto Valley and the Ethereum Foundation and whatnot. But the question is FINMA the right regulator? They are a market regulator. But if Libra is really a payment system, well, the payment system regulator is typically the central bank. So maybe it's the Swiss central bank instead of FINMA. And then you have to look at all the countries in which Libra is potentially being used or being deployed, and they may all have slightly different definitions. So, maybe in the US, Libra is considered a security,
right,
but maybe in Switzerland, it's not considered a security.
Yeah, one of the best questions that I thought was from a senator who asked, if there was a transaction that originated in Spain and it was a Pakistani who was, moving that money and they're moving it to the US, how does that transaction take place? Is Facebook maybe asking for too much clarity here?
Well, I think, I view this as a process, and, I think, the fact that they've published, these different white papers, they've started to engage with regulators is a very important part of the process. I actually disagree strongly with the people who say they should stop work while it's being defined. I think that it's very, the work that's being done now and that will be done over the next year is actually very important to regulators to figure out how to classify it and to really get into the operational details. I don't think it should launch until all these questions are answered, but I think the process of developing it, I think different authorities from different jurisdictions will identify their questions, and then the process of fleshing them out will bring clarity, I think will provide safety and soundness, and actually will protect the public.
What's a win for Facebook here? So you're familiar with the, as private sector, and now you were, in regulation previously. How does Facebook, what do they want to emerge from these hearings with?
Well, I think going into a hearing in general, your first hope is kind of do no harm. It often can be hard to win these kinds of things, but they presumably have decided on what their talking points are, and they're going to get those talking points across. I think that if I were Facebook, I would be trying to change the narrative a bit, and to try to emphasize, all the good things that this coin could potentially do in terms of economic development, financial inclusion. I think something that I personally find troubling is that Facebook for a period of a year or a year and a half, to my understanding, banned cryptocurrency ads while they were working on their own cryptocurrency. Instead of investigating Libra, maybe people should investigate that. That sounds to me like it could be viewed as uncompetitive behavior. But so by going in front of the hill and talking about Libra, they sort of changed the subject from things like that. But to my mind, there's a lot of questions about some of their other behaviors, but they're sort of deflecting from one topic to another in that sense.
Is a failure of the Facebook Libra project bad for the cryptocurrency blockchain industry?
Well, I think that I think that this will evolve. I think it's actually brought a lot of attention to the cryptocurrency market, and I think people are really distinguishing between kind of Bitcoin and Libra, or cryptocurrencies and Libra. Like my understanding, for example, the House Minority Leader made a comment in the last day or so about Bitcoin and how he saw some of the benefits of that. So I think this is actually encouraging greater understanding of it. And I really believe that the more people understand about digital assets and crypto assets, they'll see that there's actually a lot of features that are safe, that enable them to comply with laws, comply with regulatory regimes, comply with anti-money laundering concerns. And so I think that shining the light, I think, will actually help the crypto asset industry in some ways.
One of the other things that I would note is there was a lot of emphasis on Facebook's business model, right? A lot of the senators were, really emphasizing the point of they don't understand how Facebook benefits from something like this. Yeah. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that the business model will evolve, but for me, the frame of reference is again looking at these Asian tech giants and how using their phones and their social media apps is already so integral to personal finance and business finance. And so if Facebook can get some of those things to happen on the Facebook platform, whether Libra stays in the form that's been announced, or like a lot of other tech products, these things, they meet resistance, they product market fit, they test with the customers, this will evolve. But if they can drive a whole bunch of financial services, e-commerce onto these Facebook platforms, I think that's a win from Facebook, even if it doesn't look the way it looks today.
Let's talk about the conversation in D.C. as it relates to, I think, something a lot of people will be talking about, which is the election. Trump weighed in last week with his thoughts on Bitcoin. Does cryptocurrency become an election issue because of Facebook?
I really would be surprised if that happens. Facebook itself is such a high profile platform. It's easy to focus on it. And I'm sure there's plenty of issues to talk about, but I personally, that's not my expertise, but I would be surprised to see Facebook or cryptocurrencies become, an issue in the 2020 election. But I do hope. I think there's a lot of benefit that these crypto assets can bring. I really do think. Regulators and policymakers have been studying them for a long time and trying to sort of balance their missions like customer protection with promoting responsible innovation. And in fact, Facebook just got into crypto assets a year ago. The CFTC, the SEC, the Fed, the FCA, the Bank of England have all been looking at crypto assets for 5 years or more. So, the authorities have been looking at this for a while, and Facebook is actually the one catching up.
And you mentioned that international market of regulators. Obviously, regulators want to move in step with their peers internationally. Is there anybody within that landscape that you see as driving it? Is it the U.S. that's going to drive this conversation about the regulation around Libra? Do you expect there to be other meaningful participants?
Yeah, I think there will be a lot, and governments around the world and authorities around the world have been focusing on kind of fintech innovation as well as digital assets, and whether it's kind of the ministries of finance, central banks, or the market regulators or legislators. I mean, there are a lot of authorities around the world that have been very, very thoughtful about this. Certainly the CFTC, the SEC, Federal Reserve Board. In this country, I think FinCEN has actually been putting a lot of thought into that as well. In the UK, the FCA and the Bank of England, ESMA, European Central Bank. France has actually been very forward-looking. They've introduced a whole new kind of opt-in pact framework to kind of promote innovation with digital assets. Kind of Singapore, Japan have been very, but I mean, really too many to mention. I think there's a lot of thoughtful ones. And I think the Financial Stability Board, of course, will be involved because of the implications for financial stability.
What do you even think about just, I guess, the idea that they would do these hearings in the U.S. first when the Libra Association is a Swiss registered entity? What message does that send, if any?
Well, it's going to have a big footprint in the U.S. and I don't think, you can sort of say, well, they kind of looked around the world for what they thought would be, kind of the most hospitable jurisdiction. And, I think both FINMA and Swiss Central Bank are, very well looked on as regulators, but it's far from clear to me that Switzerland or FINMA is necessarily the right regulator, for Libra and Calibra. It's going to have a huge impact on the U.S. if this thing goes live. There's a ton of Facebook users here. A lot of these people will have these wallets. To me, part of what's interesting is that it's the Financial Services Committee that's looked at it first. I mean, I think there are competitive issues that also I think could be looked at in the context, just given the power that Facebook has. I mentioned the fact that they banned cryptocurrency ads while they were working on their own cryptocurrency. In addition, from my understanding of Marcus's testimony, the only wallet that WhatsApp and Instagram will support will be the Calibra wallet. And they say, well, it will be interoperable with other currency, but why shouldn't other wallets be allowed to compete on the Facebook platform?
Yeah, I think there was some differential there, and I think the comment that you're referring to is that the senator was really trying to pin them down on whether or not Facebook would be the only wallet. But I think Marcus said that he wants to see other wallet providers compete on the platform and that they would be open to that. I'm not sure that we have a real answer there, but
okay, great. So you may be closer to the detail, but I do think that given the amount of influence, I think in addition to financial services authorities, I think authorities who are looking at things like competition as well as financial stability, and consumer protection will get involved as this plays out. But I do, look, I think that there's a lot of good it can accomplish. I think that, this is although there's a lot of attention to it, just because Facebook is a big social media company that has gotten a lot of attention, but, this is what you do. You go in and, show the regulator what it is you're working. They ask details, they published, a bunch of white papers. It's clear when they did the launch, they haven't worked out every single detail. And also, these details will evolve. But that's perfectly normal, and it can evolve in a very constructive way.
As we're winding down here, let's maybe talk about the timeline. Facebook has come out and they've said 2020. Yeah. With your understanding of the scope of their ambitions, do you think that is a realistic target for Libra?
I think it's aggressive. There seem to be a lot of things to work out. I think it partly depends on, and this is something we would see as a regulator. We would provide, somebody who was applying to us and doing something that was novel and complex with comments, and then it partly depended on how quickly they came back to us and turned those things around and responded to their, our concerns. But my sense is that Facebook is putting a lot of resources into that, so I think they will move as quickly as possible on their end. So, I certainly think that a year from now they will have made a lot of progress, that things will be a lot more defined, that some of these issues will be fleshed out. I think it's important for them to keep developing and, working out the details in order for that to happen. I don't think they should just stop and wait while that takes place. That's a very important part of the process. But if I had to take the under or the over, I would take the over and say it would take longer than a year for that. For an actual, not beta, but an actual funded Libra to be spent somewhere, I think will take more than a year.
As you look at the next 6 months, a year for the project, who needs to weigh in on this that hasn't? Are there any milestones that we may see sort of emerge along this path?
I think that there will be, as it becomes clear on kind of what exactly, what kind of animal Libra is, and I think the president's tweet suggested that if it's a bank, they should apply to be a bank. Now, I don't know whether it should or should not be a bank, but there is a process for applying to be a bank in different jurisdictions, and there's time that it takes. And then if you're a bank in one jurisdiction and you want to do banking in another jurisdiction, then there's a process for that. So I think as the categories become clearer and you figure out kind of what lane the thing is in, then then there are channels of how that lane works that will become clearer. But to me, there's still a lot of question marks about what exactly it is. And as I said earlier, it's not that Facebook just gets to self-identify with whatever lane it feels comfortable being in. The regulators will look at what substance there is and help determine for them what it is, and that may involve Libra evolving in order to be in whatever lane it's going to be in.
Jeff, fascinating stuff. Where can people find out more about you, your company, and your work?
Yeah, sure, great, Pete. Yeah, so blockagent, blockagent.io, or Jeff at blockagent.io, working to establish the first SEC licensed transfer agent focused on security tokens and blockchain-based digital securities. Or follow me on Twitter at Bandman Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff, and we'll be back after the break with more expert commentary with all kinds of takes on Facebook, Libra, and what's in store for the cryptocurrency market. We'll be with you after the break.
Great, thanks.